Poor spider, I will burn your home in order to escape. And when the darkness grows into my heavily loaded back, I'll shake it off my shoulders and I'll follow my own track.
Well, welcome to another Vagabonds podcast. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Mick.
And together we are
the
Vagabond. Brought to you as always by our favorite toxic masculinity whiskey. You know, these days, the beer industry is going woke. Well, one adult beverage you can count on to never go woke is toxic masculinity whiskey. Let's face it, the name alone forbids it. So go on the internet, toxicmasculinitywhiskey.com, order a bottle. In most states, it'll be shipped right to your home. If you live in a state that's too uptight to let that happen, we're sorry, but we're trying to get distribution everywhere, and we're working on it hard. So have some toxic masculinity whiskey. You will love it.
Buy a case and you'll get a personal thank you note from Charlie.
So I'm going to let Nick take over now and introduce you to today's guest. We'll get going.
Today's guest is Lieutenant Colonel retired Darrell Elmore, who I've known off and on for a long time, like over 20 years, almost 30. Darrell finished up his career as a lieutenant colonel and retired out, but he had a very interesting beginning, starting out as a young soldier in 1956 and gradually working his way up through the ranks to make E7 a true rank, until he went to officer school and they taught him how not to scratch his back with a salad fork. But he did retire and he had a very, very interesting career, and an even more interesting career afterwards, working in Iraq as a contractor and other places. Let me introduce you to Lieutenant Colonel retired Darrell Elmore, better known as Mo.
Buenos dias, hombres. How are y'all?
Good to see you.
There he goes.
Now, should I speak in the language of the 6 o'clock news, or can I talk like one of those fellers up here where we talk like this when I grew up?
It's your choice.
Don't move your upper lip. You sound like a Southerner.
As long as at least 51% of the audience understands you, we don't care.
Okay, because every now, if I'd had a six-pack, I'd be speaking Texan, but not right now. I don't really speak a good Texan anymore. Anyway, what can I tell you? I joined the National Guard when I started working with the National Guard before I was in the Guard. I was kind of a mascot, and they took me to summer camp for the years I was 14 and 15, where I shined.
Wait. National Guard troops out in the woods, but with only you as their mascot?
Well, I was
it
was almost like Vietnam, because at summer camp down in North Fort Hood, they slept in these, squad tents on a frame over a wooden cement pallet type base pad. And I swept out the tent for this one platoon and shine boots for what I could make to go to the PX and eat ice cream every night and drink a big Pepsi. And then they took me out to the ranges, and today they'd have put them all in jail for child endangerment. But,
and maybe
I would be driving the tank and shooting. I did tank gunnery. I fired the recoilless rifles, machine guns and stuff when I was, 14, 15. And then when I was 16, I went ahead and joined the Guard and started as a tank crewman. In fact, when I was 15, they came and got me one day and says, "You got to go shoot on the rifle team because we were short some guys." And I wasn't in the Guard yet. So we went down to Brownsville, Texas, and shot on the 4th Army matches, and I shot as the last guy on our team. And in fact, I came in 10th for 4th Army, but I wasn't in the Guard yet, so they couldn't really record it. But then, I got in the Guard. They sent me to basic training. I finished basic, came home, and thought maybe I ought to try the regular Army. So I enlisted that same year and went to the 82nd. Joined the 82nd. In those days, each regiment had one company. It was a training company. So I went to AIT in Charlie Company. In fact, I arrived in the 82nd and went to Mike Company, 3rd Battalion. I walked in and the guy said, "Okay, you're in the weapons platoon." And the platoon sergeant says, come on with us. Just drop your duffel bag because all the bunks were stockaded. That's rolled up, and
Right.
everything.
We know what that is,
Well,
but not the public.
The public might.
The public doesn't.
Our
well, that stockaded means that the bunk, all the bedding was off, and they rolled up the mattresses in an S fold on the bend, and everybody was sitting against the wall. We went down to supply, and he says, "Can you shoot a carbine?" And I said, "Yeah, I qualified in the Guard." He said, "Okay, that's your weapon." And he gave me this vest and a field pack and a bunch of field gear. And I said, "What's all this?" He said, "Well, we're on alert to go to the Suez Canal because the Brits have jumped in there and there's kind of a little battle going on." And I said, "What about AIT?" He says, "You'll get it on the plane." And I said, "Well, what about jump school?" He says, "You'll get it when you go out the door." And being 16 and dumb as mud, I said, "Oh, cool, that sounds good. I can, we'll go right to it." Cooler heads prevailed, and we didn't deploy. And a few days later, they sent me down to Easy Company in the 2nd Battalion, where I was the only white guy in the platoon. The triple nickel, the 555 infantry, airborne infantry, was an all-black regiment in World War II. And when they disbanded, the majority of their troops went to the 505. And so all the NCOs and the troops in my platoon. So that's the first time I was ever a true minority, which was kind of an interesting experience. But and also being a private leg, a non-airborne person in the airborne unit didn't do me much good. So I did lots of details and other shit. And then they kicked me on down to Charlie Company, which was the training company for the 05 that cycle. So I went through AIT and it's an interesting AIT because each squad had a real sergeant as a squad leader. We had 2 NCOs as platoon sergeant, platoon leader, and we had E6 squad leaders. So everything that was individual training we got in groups, but when it came to, combined activities, we had a sergeant who knew what was going on to put us through it. So we learned how to do it under control instead of a bunch of dumb, ducklings walking around in a circle looking for mama. And I think it was some of the best training I ever had in the Army because it stuck with me through my entire career. Then I went to jump school. I went to D Company then after we completed that and went to jump school while I was in D Company, which was a weapons company. Each battalion had 3 rifle companies and a weapons company. And I was put in a machine gun platoon and became the assistant gunner on a water-cooled 30 caliber machine gun, which was heavy, but that sucker could shoot. Man, that sucker, you could fire that summit forever as long as you got water in the jacket and you got belts full of ammo. But the Army got his brain, out of whack, and they went pentomic, and they closed down the regiment, and I went to the 503rd there. They had the 2nd Airborne Battle Group 503rd. I went to A Company as a rifleman and didn't want to do that. And somebody saw my goddamn code score and said, "Oh, this guy's got to go to headquarters company and be a radioman." So I went over there and I played field wireman for a couple months while they tried to wait for a school to open up. And I said, "This sucks. I'm going back to the infantry." So I took a short, re-enlisted, went to the 11th Airborne Division in Germany and E Company 187 and all that kind of stuff. So I went through that kind of drill for years and years. I went to the 86. I did well. I was on the 11th Airborne Division Honor Guard. I went 7th Army NCO Academy. I got my EIB, Expert Infantry
Badge. Where the organized crime had an honor guard.
Oh God,
Yeah.
Platoon leader was Guy S. Malloy Jr., the son of a general and a West Pointer, and that was the most detail-oriented sucker I ever worked for. And then we also worked at the 7th Army NCO Academy, and I became an assistant instructor. I'm an E3 when I go there, and I'm a PFC, and everything's I'm doing well and enjoying my life, as a soldier. And we trained our ass off. I mean, I hit the ground running. I arrived, and 2 days later, I'm in Hohenfels carrying a BAR, running up these 19 Charlie in a live fire, platooning the attack exercises. And I learned some shit over there. I mean, these guys, all of our NCOs had already been in that unit for 3 years or more. And my platoon sergeant, Sergeant Bazar, he was from the old triple nickel, the 555, and he couldn't read and write really well. In fact, those days they had what they called a dum-dum discharge came through, and if a guy didn't score well, they would put him out of the Army. And they lost a lot of really quality infantrymen because they had no education to speak of. And in fact, we
The
used
Army and
to.
its wisdom.
Yeah, well, me, Derzinski, and Smith used to get with Bazaar, and we would help him with vocabulary words. So he could, and he took some tests and he got his score up, so he didn't get the boot. But our weapons squad leader, Sergeant Bailey, did get the boot. But that was a good idea anyway, because he was a poor underachiever if there ever was one. But anyway, it was that kind of thing, and we had some good people, good NCOs, and we knew what we were doing.
So, when we're talking about NCO, can we fast forward here a bit to where you became an NCO when you eventually entered Special Forces?
Okay, I got out of the Army. Well, I got in trouble after they deactivated the 11th Airborne and put me in the 24th Infantry because I didn't want to be a fucking leg.
Yeah.
And I got in some trouble over there. In fact, I think the epitome of my trouble was the day I made sergeant. I made buck sergeant. They changed everything in 58. They created the buck sergeant again. So two guys and myself, we got a married guy to get us a bottle of whiskey, and we went to watch a football game. And while we were there, got tipsy, and some general was in the stands with his wife and kids, and they pointed us out to the MPs who came to get us. And I said something to the effect that motherfucking straight leg don't know shit, and what's he fucking with us for? We're paratroopers, not legs. And that ended up having my sergeant orders were rescinded, and I got reduced to E3.
Whoa.
Yeah, so that's the way it worked. I was up and down, and I'd get busted in town, and I'd get promoted after we go to the field.
Oh, I want everybody to know out there in the public, this is the typical back history of people
anyway,
that
I got out
eventually
the
ended
Army.
up in Delta Project.
Yeah, well, we go back
as
to the
an
States.
alumni.
We go back to the States, and I get out of the Army and went to work and went out. I'm going to settle the world, find out what welfare is and shit. And I go back in the Army, and some fast talking asshole sergeant convinced me I should go to the Army Security Agency. Yes. And so
they tried to get me to do that.
I end up being a Morse intercept operator and also a non-Morse intercept operator. And before it was over with, I was a RDF operator with secondaries as 05B.
In the ASA?
Shit. Yeah, ASA. And then they sent me out to this field station. In fact, I tried to get out. I tried to get out of the ASA to go back to the infantry, and this colonel called me in, an old crusty infantry colonel, in fact. He said, "You little son of a bitch, you're going to stay here till you pass the courses or you die." And that made sense to me. I can understand him. So I passed the damn course, and I went on to get a job, and I'm hating the job. I mean, I'm doing the job, but I'm hating doing it. And then they came out with this Army Security Agency Special Operations Attachments that were part of each Special Forces group. Well, I volunteered for that.
The door is open a crack.
And I'm airborne. And I got an EIB. And they both made some, it got me to Fort Bragg in 62. And I go to this SF. All these SOD guys were supposed to be 3 qualified or S qualified.
I remember the SOD teams. Yeah.
So I go through
radio. Yeah.
Well, we did some other shit too.
Yeah.
But anyway, we went through there, and I went through the SF course and became I went through the whole, what they then, in those days, they called it branch training. It later became the Q course. We went through branch training, and I finished branch training, and and like 2 weeks later, they sent me to Ranger School. And I came back from Ranger School, and we worked. We were the 5th group then, and then later they shifted us over to the 7th group. It was the 403rd, and then I got to go to Halo School. That was kind of cute. I was walking down the street there on Smoke Bomb.
What year?
63. It was in the spring of 63, and I'm walking by, and I hear these 2 instructors saying, "We got a class about to start, and we got 6 slots we can't fill." Well, I took off at a high lope, ran down there, and walked into my sergeant major, and I told him exactly what they had. And I said, he said, "Well, I'll only send 3 guys." And I says, "Well, I demanded I get one of them. I found it. I get it one." He said, "Okay, you can go." So I got to go to Halo School. Finished that, and they put me, and we did all kinds of stuff. I went down and supported the officers branch training because they took a separate one, and they didn't go to the mountains. They went to Fort Stewart, Georgia, so they didn't have to climb any fucking hills. And they were a bunch of dickheads.
No bitterness there. No bitterness.
I'll tell you what, I went down there to be the radio operator.
Oh.
Everybody's supposed to be, team leader, XO, weapons, all this stuff, and do that job while they're in the field. And these guys wouldn't help me carry any. And I had the entire 109 system, and I had the batteries. I had
everything.
I even had the
goddamn
The
generator.
generator
yes, I even had the gas generator, the quarter horsepower generator. And these guys weren't going to help me carry shit. So every day I'd get my little radio and I'd walk off a couple miles to get away from them and play in the game, get away, offset. I'd make contact by myself, and I still remember my call sign, NN2V, dot it, da 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 da. And I would get that sucker cranking, and I'd send it, and I'd get cranking, and I'd send it. And then I made contact. I made all my contacts, but I didn't send any messages because they didn't write them.
Well, there, legal point.
They were supposed to write and encrypt them using the trigraph and a one-time pad. They wouldn't bother. That's a sergeant's job. And I remember the guy who was supposed to be the comm officer. Name is Sandlin. He said, I'm an officer. I don't carry that stuff. I don't do that petty shit. So after about 3 days, the G chief came by and I explained what was going on. He said, you go off here about 100 yards and leave me alone. And I looked back and I could see them all, quivering like tent pegs if it's been hit with a damn offset hammer. And I went back and they started giving me some help, but they never really did much. But the way it finally got through to them was when the first resupply didn't come. And I said, well, that's okay. I got rice in my rucksack. I got soup mix in my rucksack. I got sardines in my rucksack. And they didn't have any food. And I said, you didn't write the message. What? I said, like I told you, you write the message, I send it. You have to help me send it. If you don't help, you don't get fed. Things changed. They started to learn about that. But the biggest thing was that only 2 out of the 12 had volunteered for SF.
Yeah.
The rest were all detailed by their branches.
They were on punishment.
Well, the branches didn't think they were going to be, do anything in their branch, so they just picked them into the SF thing. They were airborne qualified because in those days, all your combat arms are supposed to go through be jump qualified and or ranger qualified, or both. And anyway, that went on like that, and I go back up and I wanted to go overseas because things were heating up, and I got assigned. I got to the first group, the SF SOD at the first group, and we got over there. And besides the ASA shit, they were really incorporating us into the group to do things in the group, because I ended up being on the cadre at jump school and jump master school. Oh, I got to go to jump master school when I was a PFC in Germany. With the last one, the 11th Airborne, ever ran. And I fought a guy named Vanderswam for first point, and he beat me out, but he became a Golden Knight and got killed in a plane crash years later. But
you were in the 11th Airborne. Did you know Jimi Hendrix?
No, I did not know him.
Too bad.
I mean, there was only 5 battle groups when I was there. So, and then half the division was in Munich, and the other half was in Augsburg, and the 187 was out at a old German fighter base, about 12 clicks outside of town.
Probably the happiest. They were the furthest from the flagpole.
Exactly, but we also had an airfield. But rough, they flew light aircraft in and out on a dirt strip, and we had the division riggers there at Gabligan. It was pretty nice setup though. But we had to go to do any real training. You had to go to Hohenfels or Wildflecken or somewhere else.
Grafenwehr.
Anyway, I got to Okinawa, and we started going TDY to Vietnam, and by this time, I made I was an E5 when I got over there. I made E6 3 times before it took, because I'm
sure there's a logical explanation.
What happened was some clerk added my name to the E6 list, but it wasn't official. And so I'd be at Mukwa, or I'd be at Minton or Trang Sup, and they'd say, "Hey, Mo, you made E6," and I'd say, "Oh, great!" So I'd get some on and I go back to our team, command. They say, "Oh, take them off. That was a mistake." Second time I did it. Third time I says, when I get paid for it, I'll sew them on. Otherwise, fuck off.
There you go.
So you see the money coming in, it ain't official.
That's right.
And then about that time, I got to go to scuba school in Okinawa. That was a fun job, because I came back from a TDY to Vietnam, And well, I went down there. I went to Vietnam the first time in 64, in January 64, came back in July, went back in December, came back in April, went back in April because I got put on a project that to this day is still sensitive. And I came back off of that one, I think, in July or August. And then, I get back to Okinawa, and I come back to Okinawa, I've been out there screwing off, no real PT, because all you wear your web gear and your weapons and stuff, but you don't really run and do push-ups and shit. And the sergeant major says, hey, I went off for the weekend and 3-4 days of debauchery and came back in. What are you saying? You speak
An officer term, debauchery.
Well, a satanella.
Instead of intoxication and intercourse.
Well, just R&R.
Yeah.
Anyway, bent the rules of society. Anyway, we came back in and he says, you're going to scuba school Monday. Go take your physical. And I went to scuba school after no preparation of any kind. And I tell you, those son of a bitches damn near killed me. I hurt so bad because they do all this stretching shit, I hurt so bad that guys had to literally pick me up out of my bunk in the morning and kind of,
jumpstart you.
And jumpstart me in the shower. And in those days, we had a great drought in Okinawa. We only had fresh water for 2 hours a day. The rest of it was in 55-gallon drums. And the rest of the time, the shower was salt water. So we'd go in there and take a saltwater shower to get your body moving. And then I'd go to school. And after about a week, I was catching up and I got through it there. And afterwards, I did pretty good because Earl Kalani was the NCOIC and he wanted to get me on the committee, but that didn't work out. Anyway, I finally got out of the ASA side of it, of SF. And by this time, I had about a year and a half, close to 2 years of TDY to Vietnam. And I got out of it altogether. In fact, the ASA sergeant major came by.
Did you go to Delta during that time?
No, I never worked with it.
This is after.
Yeah, so this is 67, and they assigned me to B Company, but I was only there for a few weeks because I was going to the 5th. So in May of 67, I go to the Trang and I walk in, and a guy named Joel Keith comes over and he says, hey, Mo, why don't you come over to Omega and run recon with me? And I said, oh, okay. And that's one of my good stories about Sergeant Major Odom. He was the acting sergeant major because there was another sergeant major named, it starts with a T. He had come off Okinawa, but he was on R&R. So I go in to see Odom, and he's literally got watches on both arms. And he looks at my watch and he says, you look like a guy who could use a new watch. I says, oh, that's a good watch. He says, no, I think I can, and I've got some good, and he opens up a drawer and takes out trays of watches in his office.
Little side business.
And he had a deal in Okinawa. He was working with a guy who had a pawn shop. They brought in the first Seikos that ever happened. And so I'm in there.
Getting all those good watches.
No. This is when Seiko just started, and finally it was just going international. They went international in 65, which I found out just recently. And anyway, I go in there and I says, no, I don't need a watch. And besides that, he said, oh, here's what he told me. He says, get one of these watches, and I'm sure we can find a good assignment for you somewhere. And I looked at him and I says, well, I would be accepted over in B-50 with Project Omega. And he looked at me and he says, well, I don't have shit for you. Get the fuck out of my office. Welcome to the 5th Special Forces Group. So I get over to
going to recon. No, I don't want nothing to do with you.
So I go over there to recon, and they were in the middle of a stand down and refit because at that time the part of them were working operations inside Vietnam, and the other part had already gone to FOB2 at Kontum to take up the Daniel Boone mission, the one south for Cambodia.
Right.
So we went through the training on, McGuire rigs and immediate action drills and rigging the ladders and all this other stuff. And we did that for about a week. And then we took off to a launch site, and we were launching out of Play Jarang. And I ran my first mission with a guy named Miller, who later got
I'm telling you, those guys are everywhere.
They're terrible. They cannot be trusted.
And under every rock, there's one.
Well, Omega ran 6-man teams, 2 U.S. and four mountain yards.
Right.
And we had Australians running our reaction force, and well, they called it the Mike force, but it wasn't really a Mike force. It was
Right, your bright light.
security force, and a reaction force. And they had a dedicated reaction team with 2 Australians and I think it was 12 mountain yards. That would be the immediate response to a team in trouble that had to get out and all that stuff. And they were really. Pappy Lamar was the commander, Major Lamar, and that sucker he was a decrepit, beat up, out of shape old fucker, but he was good to the core. He took care of his troops, and everybody I knew thought the world of him, because he like he told us, you go on the ground, if you call to come out, we'll get you out. We'll worry about why you came out and all that other shit when you get back.
Right.
He never questioned the guy on the ground. When the guy on the ground called the shots.
Which later in the war we found out in projects, held true.
Break contact, continue the mission, fix bayonets and break out, Anyway, so I ran a mission with Miller, and we came back, and he told him that, hey, Elmore could run his own team. So the next day I had my own team and started running recon, and I ran, I don't know how many missions. I never kept count of them. When I joined, they said 6 missions or 6 months, and then you can go on to another assignment. And hell, I had 6
They
missions.
actually said that?
Yeah, they actually told us that. Yeah, wasn't that?
Did they say it with a straight face? Yeah.
It's not like Beckwith. Beckwith had a card that said, he told guys, he says, come on in here, I'll get you a medal or a coffin, or maybe both.
There you go, and a camera.
Yeah, and well, maybe that too. Anyway, I ran missions there, and then after a while, it was funny. I never had a one that went out with me more than twice. We had a high rate.
Yeah, body odor or what?
It must have been, but we had a high turnover of guys who ran a couple of missions and decided that wasn't for them.
Yeah.
And they left. And
well, it's not for the faint of heart.
Well, it's not even faint of heart is not part of it. You got to have a certain self-confidence.
Yeah.
In your own judgment and things. And some people feel more comfortable in a party of a bigger group than and it's just like snipers. You got to be able to be comfortable in your own skin. You can't just, and you've got to have a mindset that allows you to create a target as opposed to a human you're shooting at, because you start getting into the wishy-washy fuzzy stuff, then you start questioning what you're doing, and it may not shoot. So not everybody is cut out to be a sniper. I don't care if they could shoot, a half minute of angle at everything. But so we got it sent up there to Khartoum, and finally they brought us all up to Khartoum, and they just closed out Omega, and then all the Aussies went to the Mike Force and Pleiku, and we went to Khartoum, and I got up there, and we went in there and did some training, and then they came a stand down. And the stand down for Project Daniel Boone was because Jackie Kennedy was going to Angkor Wat. And they did not want any kind of embarrassment or notoriety of Americans being caught in Cambodia while she was in Cambodia.
So it was a noise abatement thing,
Yes.
right?
So we spent about a week or 10 days picking our noses and scratching our asses, and letting the bad guys get more prepared and use, we gave them a stand down too, so they could cool off, because by this time we knew that the NBA had created these anti-recon units, and they were, tri-border area was, all of that was full of them. And even into South Vietnam along the Doc To area, they were out there. So we finally started operating again, and this was being November. And I ran one mission, and we didn't get on the ground. Weather and I guess the enemy actions had closed out the LZ. They were covered. And we went back, and then the next time I was supposed to go in on a wiretap.
Yeah, wiretaps.
I had this Ewer thing with these clothespin type of microphone that I was supposed to hook on the table and all that shit. And I'm sitting there, and by this time we're getting intelligence that says that the bastards were walking down there. They had guys walking their cables with their fingers on the cable.
How big was the tape recorder for the wiretap?
It was probably maybe 8 inches wide, inch and a half thick and like almost like a cigar box, but a little bit thinner.
Right. Did it have the little mini tapes or regular cassette tapes?
Yeah, they were small tape.
Right. Now, and how often did you have to change them?
Oh God, I can't remember now, but it wasn't only like about 15 minutes, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
But it ran fairly slow.
Later, they came out with the little mini tapes and that you could every 8 hours, and then you had one that slow pull that you change them every 24 hours, which is a lot better than crawling back down there and trying to put it.
Yeah, but see, the intel we had was that you couldn't leave it there. You couldn't hook it up and leave it because they were running the cable. The guys were walking along, running their hands, and the guy was running every 15 minutes. That was kind of the interval. Well, that's the intel, but we don't know if that's true or not. That's just the report we got. And so I went in that one morning and we didn't get on the ground. We had the weather was iffy, but we got I think we had some ground fire and some other stuff, and they decided to go back later. And we went back to Khartoum. I got a picture of us, my team. I never took pictures.
Neither did I. I don't know where all these pictures
we believed in the OPSEC shit.
Yeah.
And the picture was taken by the helicopter crew. I think it was the 52nd or 57th Assault Helicopter Company, Gladiators. I think they were.
Rotor heads.
Anyway, we're there. Before I go on, in Omega, running the Daniel Boone, we were supposed to be sterile, and we were deniable in that we had to wear NVA style uniforms and carry nothing but foreign weaponry, no ID, no nothing. If we were captured, they said the U.S. would not even admit that you even existed. And our gunships that would come and help us out could only use machine gun fire. They could not use rockets because rockets were identifiable pure American, whereas machine guns, 7.62 or 30 caliber, are, ubiquitous. We could wear our canteens and web gear because they had it everywhere. There's no big thing, but we couldn't carry AR-15s, M16s, M60s, M79.
You carry World War II U.S.
We couldn't do either. Nothing. We had to carry AKs in my team.
Okay.
So we were on AK.
Upscale. I'd rather have an AK than a Thompson anyway.
Well, hell yeah. But anyway, so we get in on the ground that time, and it's kind of funny because you're the team leader. You're up in the right front on the helicopter. You're watching yourself going in, and I'm looking and I'm saying, "Hey, this ain't right. There's not supposed to be a stream here. We're on short. We did an NOE approach all the way in, and the guns were up behind us, and of course the Cubby was up high, guiding him in. And I said, "This isn't right because we're crossing things that weren't on the map. That was supposed to be for my AO." And just about 100 yards out of our primary, I looked to the outside, and I could see under the trees. They had brought the trees in and tied them together, the bamboo and stuff. There was a goddamn base. It was L-shaped. They had a parade ground with a flagpole. They had barracks on both sides and a headquarters building at the top.
Ooh.
And in my mind's eye, I say, this is not a good place to be. I'm going to land here 200 or 300 meters from a place full of people. Well, we get off, and of course we run off, and we got off in some elephant grass and couldn't see shit. And we moved off a little bit and set up to listen. And about that time, we hear people moving all over the place. And later on, my point man, through an interpreter, told me they were screaming at each other to capture them alive. We don't want to kill them. Well, I got into the evade mode by this time. And I get on the horn and I said, "Hey, we're in trouble. I may need to get pulled out of here." And they said, "Okay, what's going on?" And I explained, and they said, "Okay, we're coming to get you." Well, ain't nobody coming to get me. I can't hear them. I can't see them. They're telling me, "I'm right over your LZ. Pop smoke." I popped a smoke. They couldn't see it.
That guy put you in the wrong place.
They said, put out a WP. I put out a WP. They couldn't see it. And it went up through the,
Yeah.
And by this time, we're getting not frantic, but we're getting a little bit irritated. I am, because and my yards are starting to look at me funny, like, why no helicopter come,
Well, didn't Cubby realize he'd put you in the wrong place?
Well, let's get to the story a little bit. We kept moving, and of course, the white phosphorus finally dissipated pretty quickly. And I see a couple of hobos. In those days, the A1Es were called hobos out of Playcoon.
Yeah.
Then later they became Spads or Sandys. And I said, I called and said I could see these guys, and they said, no, we're right over you. Why can't you? So I literally climbed a fucking tree with a mirror, and I put my shiny on the A1s going by, and they spotted it. One of them finally spotted me, and they came and they put me in over 12 kilometers out of my primary. So I got back to Khartoum, and I was hot enough to fuck. And I went down into the intel bunker there, and I look at the map, and on the map they had plotted, I think it was the 9th NVA Division headquarters, about 200 meters from my primary LZ. And the NCO in there says, we didn't tell you this morning because we were afraid you wouldn't go in. About this time, I probably got it a 3-foot hover. I don't know. I was usually pretty calm and took shit, but I wasn't. I went up to our platoon sergeant, the recon platoon sergeant, and I can't think of his name to this day. He was a good guy. And I said, I need to take a break. He says, I don't like the way this is operating, and I just need to take a break for a little bit. He says, okay, no sweat. We need to send some guys down to the 4th Division. I said, what?
The gang
He
that
said, yeah.
shoot straight.
You know, he said the LRP company down there is forming up, and I guess it was a sergeant major to sergeant major deal because, you know, the 4th Division, I call it the frightened 4th because they went into Play Trap Valley and took them 6 weeks to break contact, you know, that kind of thing. But so he was sending a 1-0 down. That was me, a commo.
Like Prince Harry with the paparazzi.
Yeah. Well, he sent out a 4-man team from Khartoum, commo guy, ops guy, medic, and me as 1-0 to go down and help them set up their organization because they were just getting their work company back up and running. 4 days later, the company commander comes in. It was a captain we had kicked out of Omega and kicked out of Special Forces, and he had gone to the 4th Division, convinced them he was Mr. Recon. He knew all about it. He looked at us. We knew him. We weren't invited anymore, so we're heading back to Khartoum, and went to Playcoon to catch a ride out. And I'm on the chopper pad there to catch a chopper back up, and this Sergeant Major Lisi comes out and he says, "Is your name Elmore?" "Yeah." "You ain't going back up there." I said, "Why?" He says, "They gave you to me. You're going to the Mike Force to replace a guy named Martinez, Guadalupe Martinez," which is a good buddy of mine before that too, because he just gotten killed in action. So I became the number one or the recon platoon leader for I think it was the 24th company in the Mike Force. And I stayed in the Mike Force until the end of my tour. Go to Nha Trang to process out, and they lost my records. So I said, well,
Sure.
So I go to the NCO club there in Nha Trang at the headquarters, and I'm sitting there drinking a couple salty. I mean, it's hot, and you gotta hydrate. So after about 3 salty dogs, a fellow named Tom Schultz walks in, another good buddy of mine. He says, "Hey, why don't you come over to Project Delta with me and run recon?" And I said, "Have another drink." Good idea. So we go over there, and Major Allen was the commander, Bruiser Allen, and I go in to see him, and he interviews me, and he says, "Yeah, okay, you can come over." So I go over to headquarters and extend for 6 months. Not a problem. We don't need your records to extend you. We got a piece of paper that says you can stay. And so I joined and went recon, and I was in recon until I guess it was May when they had the second Tet offensive in Saigon, actually Saigon, Cholan, Jadin. Yeah. And the Delta Ranger unit, the 81st Airborne Rangers, went down as a reaction force to augment the ARVN forces on the ground because they didn't have much Americans. In fact, they couldn't use American gunships or anything else. It was strictly an ARVN show. And the first day or 24 hours or so, they lost half the advisors.
Yeah.
They weren't killed, but they all wounded and evacuated. So they asked for some volunteers to go down, and I said, it's a company of Vietnamese. It's kind of like Mike Force. So I volunteered and went down to I became the senior advisor to the 5th Company. And I stayed with them, and we operated for a little bit in town, and then we went out on the rocket belt and worked operations out there to interdict and all that shit.
Interdict all the rockets that were being fired.
Stop, make them keep moving so they couldn't set up to fire them, and try to find. And they had all this shit cached to support future operations, and they had more rockets all over the damn place and little caches here and there.
Yeah.
And so we did that stuff, and then while we were there one morning, we were out there doing something. Now this was later. We're out. We got some officers then, and I was reduced to the senior enlisted advisor as opposed to the senior advisor because
Absolutely.
now that's another thing. In Omega, in Omega, the team leader carried the radio. 6-man team, and I carried the radio. In Project Delta, same thing. The senior American carried the radio. So as a team, it was funny because we're out there, we're in contact with some local VC or some fuckers, and I'm on the radio, and the Vietnamese are talking to me, and the captain, that was the senior advisor, they're ignoring him. And like I told him, I says, we are not the advisors. We're not really advising these guys because my Captain Bick had been in the Army by that time. He came down from the north. He was one of the northern Vietnamese that came south when they partitioned.
Right. Demarcation.
He had the Vietnamese equivalent of the Medal of Honor twice. And the sucker knew his shit in a lot of ways. And I helped him in some stuff, but he didn't know it all. But we were basically fire support coordinators for him and call in support.
Yeah.
Get him the artillery, get him the airstrikes and all that stuff. And finally, Captain Humphus got a hold of my boss and explained the facts of life that I was the de facto senior advisor because I had the radio and that's all they cared about.
Yeah.
And that was one of the cases where I don't know if you care about this, but probably one of the scariest things that ever happened to me in Vietnam. Helicopter, I'm the only American with this company and these Vietnamese are little miscreant mean suckers. These were some tough little son of a bitches and they fought their ass off.
Oh, yeah, they were.
These guys were good. And we're out there on this in a fucking bunch of dried up rice fields, and this helicopter flies over and we get a call and they want to know if I'm on the ground there. And I said, yes. So they land. And this captain runs out and hands me an envelope. And I said, what's this? He says, it's your back pay. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, when we lost your records, we stopped your pay. Now, this is 2.5 months later, and you had...
Wait a minute. You didn't notice you weren't getting... Oh, you were in the field.
Yeah, I'm in the field.
Yeah,
and
okay.
I had money. I mean, I had some money in the Trang and the Play Coup at the team house. I had money there. I never spent shit, hardly.
Let's not go into that.
Anyway, this guy, well, never mind. So he hands me about 3 months' pay, and I'm the only American out there. And all I could think to myself was, oh, fuck, let's don't make contact because I just know I'm going to get shot in the back of the head.
Oh, yeah.
And one of these Nugents is going to run off with the money. That's the same reason I wouldn't buy a gold Rolex.
Exactly.
I didn't want some NVA private going on R&R wearing my gold Rolex.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. And
that's a Jay Grave story I could tell you later on. But that in Project Delta was an interesting outfit, like you say. It was the guys doing the operations were generically outlaws in a lot of ways. We were an organization where almost everybody would go to the sound of the guns. Nobody was busy looking for a place to hide.
No. And
the same thing in Omega. The guys that operators as a group were that way. Hell, even in Somalia later on, when I had the Marine snipers, there'd be some activity and they'd look around, and here's this stupid fat American lieutenant colonel up there on the shooting points and saying, what's going on, man? Because I said, well, maybe I'll get a shot. They didn't understand why I was coming up there, because I could have stayed back in the bunker somewhere.
Yeah, there are people do that.
There's lots of them that do that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
This is a perfect, because we're at about 50 minutes right now. So we all got 10 minutes left of the YouTube.
Okay.
It's a good transition at the end of this portion to talk about what's going on in the U.S. military now. I'd love to hear your analysis of what's going on in the U.S.
Well, I can tell you that my wife's nephew is just retiring this month. In fact, I think he's retiring tomorrow. A full colonel in the cyber command who started out in the armor.
Cyber command?
Yeah, he's computer. They have a whole new command in the Army, another branch. It's a cyber branch. to dealing with the cyber,
Okay.
They
the
need
computer world. And he's just looking forward to get out from under, because they're being attacked with the minutia. They're being attacked by the societal mores that are being fed everybody. And they're not getting their recruiting because there ain't enough trannies out there to fill all the ranks.
Yeah.
That's basically it.
Yeah.
There ain't enough. There
I
ain't
want to
enough.
remember what happened to Joan Rivers here, Colonel. Okay. Don't go in for any cosmetic surgery.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the other thing that the Veterans Administration is looking at this thing where they said, "Oh yes, we'll do transitional surgery for these folks." It ain't service connected. If they are this way, it happened before they got in the service, and it had nothing to do with being in the service. So there's no reason for anybody, military or post-military, to get the government to pay for this shit. This is elective. If it's elective, you pay out of your own ass.
It's a mental illness.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's never.
I can see,
I think it's an
mental
aberration.
illness.
I can see giving them psychiatric help, but certainly
Yeah.
not surgical.
I mean, I can say, okay, if you're that way, I can't stop it. I can't change it. And I believe that you may be that way, but it doesn't fit what we need. If you're going to defend this nation, you got to have a military that's cohesive and not full of divisions that we're self-inflicting divisions within our military.
Yeah. Yeah. It's getting
And I mean,
jammed down their throats.
Well, when I was in the 173rd, I had one of my squads that said, "Oh, we want to have all black guys in this squad." And I says, "No, my platoon, we're going to be assigned as the job calls for it and by your specialty, because we're all wearing green uniforms. We'll all act like we're the same thing."
Who was making the demand? The black guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They wanted to be segregated from the rest of the platoon. They wanted to be,
They
and
can all
there was
hang out together.
we had an attachment to the platoon. This is an older guy with a 90-millimeter recoilless rifle gunner who came from somewhere. I don't know what outfit. I think he must have been a headquarters company. And I got with him because he was about 27 years old and kind of the de facto leader of the black troops in my platoon. And I explained to him, I said, "Look, this is the way it is. If you guys can't handle it, well, we'll just have to reassign you somewhere where they will handle it." And he says, "Where's that?" I said, "Probably a place called Long Bin Jail, because what you're doing, when I give you an order and you fail to follow it, it'll be a court martial." And he gave me, like a big eyes. And I said, "Yeah, that's the way it is. We're a platoon. We operate as a group. We operate as equals of all kinds. And if anybody can't deal with it, we're just going to have to manage it some way."
Good move, Mo. Good move.
Sadly, I'm
More
not
of the
sure
Army
what
would have
is
done
going
that.
on.
When
Well, it's like when I was a headquarters company commander at TRADOC when they deactivated the Women's Army Corps. And I had to integrate the barracks with when we brought all the women into the headquarters and headquarters company I ended up being headquarters company of both headquarters TRADOC and headquarters Fort Monroe. They put both companies together. I think I had at the maximum 1,500 people on my morning report.
How many were female?
Over 300.
And you had to find billeting for them in with.
Well, yeah, the biggest question was, what are we going to do with these latrines that have these urinals? And that was hey, this was just like
That would
today
be very traumatic and upsetting to the current generation.
at a post headquarters meeting with all the high speed folks in there. "Oh, what are we going to do? And they were talking about making them planners and how about this? And finally, I sat down with my first sergeant and
Geraniums.
Uranium.
and my
Wow.
XO. Well, yeah, my first sergeant, my XO, and we're sitting there. I says, I think it could be out of sight, out of mind. And they said, "We agree," and I said, "Okay." So I called the post engineers and I got
the box
the
around
guy
it?
and I told him, "This is an emergency." And he came over there with his guys and they took plywood and they built the goddamn box that went around them,
Covered them up.
painted them the same color as the walls. It was never mentioned again. It just disappeared. The problem disappeared.
But see, now it's gone back the other way, because the women in the women's barrack with penises would demand the urinals be uncovered.
Well, you saved the Army money by not.
In order
Very
to
commendable.
in order to live that genre, they have to squat to pee. A true female and men's body cannot do both. They can't be both. They're going to have to sit down to take a leak.
Now, is that your own rule or is that an
It would be my
official?
rule. It would be my
US
rule. If you're a woman, you act like a woman.
Hey, look at your britches. That'll tell
But
you.
what about when it's the other way around? What if it's a girl who's a man now?
Well, unless she's got a piece of hose that can direct her flow, she's going to put out in the tree too.
I told you, man. Rude.
Okay.
Rude to the
All right.
core.
We're not going to adjust. We're not going to adjust our plumbing unless there's a requirement.
Okay, we've made Facebook jail famous.
Yeah.
We've gone from jail to
This would be
convict.
interesting. This may be the end of our podcast on YouTube.
And now you see
What the
why I
hell,
never
we're willing to
promote
take
it anymore.
I think we're going to wrap up our
Public
first
portion.
phase here, and all you people watching on YouTube. He claims he's got even better stories coming up, but they're only going to be put up on Patreon. So we invite you all
To pay.
come
To pay.
and pay to be
By the way,
one of our
I'm gonna
Patreon
see-
subscribers. Even if you don't watch the videos, imagine a warm, fuzzy feeling you'll get just knowing you've given us money.
Run, run, run for the dragon from treason. Far enough till I reach your warm season. Run, run, run in the long run.